Does everybody know who this is? King Charles III, the King of Great Britain. He's in the news a lot, unfortunately, not just because he's the King of Great Britain. Unfortunately, he has family problems. It started a long time ago. His first wife, Princess Diana, was killed in a terrible car crash a few months after their divorce. His current wife, Queen Camilla, also serves as stepmother to his two sons, William and Harry, who seem to hate each other. I don't bring up King Charles to disparage him or make fun of him, because all of us in our families see similar problems, either in our immediate family or our extended family. And the only real difference between our family and his family is that his problems are very public. Well, all summer long, we've been studying the life of Joseph. We've been learning lessons from the life of Joseph. Joseph's family also has problems. And they're also very public, having been recorded in Scripture, in the Bible, the best-selling book of all time. We first met Joseph back in chapter 37, where he brought a bad report about his brothers to his father. It was also in that chapter that Joseph had two dreams. In one of those dreams, he dreamed that his brothers all bowed down to him. And Joseph told his brothers about this dream. We can see their reaction because the first opportunity they had after that, they conspired to kill him. Only one of his 10 brothers that were present spoke up. And so instead of killing him, they sold him into slavery. So Joseph ended up in Egypt, where he struggled for a while as a slave and then in prison for being charged. He was innocent about attacking Potiphar's wife. But in prison, it became known that Joseph had this gift from God to interpret dreams. And when Pharaoh had a very difficult dream, word got to him that Joseph could interpret the dream. The dream, of course, is that dream of 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was so happy that his dream was interpreted that he clothed Joseph in fine linen, put a signet ring on his finger, and a gold chain around his neck. Then he gave Joseph authority over all the land of Egypt, except for Pharaoh himself. In particular, he gave Joseph authority over the gathering of the excess grain in the first 7 years and the distribution of that grain in during the 7 years of famine. Last week, Greg preached from chapter 42 of Genesis. And in chapter 42, Joseph faced his past when his brothers showed up in Egypt to buy grain. So he gave them the grain. He sent them home with their money concealed in their sacks, and he kept one of the brothers, Simeon, as a hostage. And so that brings us up to date to where we are today. Today, we're going to study chapters 43 and 44 in Genesis. If you'll turn there with me, it's a lot of territory to cover. We'll read a good deal of it together, but I will narrate some parts of it as well. So let's begin chapter 43, the first couple verses. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, "Go back, buy us a little food." Judah spoke up right away and said, "Dad, the last time we were there, the guy that gave us the grain said, 'Don't come back here unless you bring your brother Benjamin,' to prove that story you told me about how you weren't spies, how you were all the brothers of one father." Well, Jacob doesn't want to hear any of this. In fact, he berates his sons and says, "Why did you tell him anything about your brother or your family anyway?" And then his brothers say, "But he asked us." He asked us pointedly about you, and he asked us about our brother. But that's not really true, is it? If you'll just turn back a page and look back at chapter 42, when all this happens, you can see that in verse 9 is where Joseph accuses his brothers of being spies. And then in verse 13, the brothers say, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of the one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. So the brothers are lying to their father here. Joseph had not asked them particularly about it. But this is the way the family runs here. Finally, in second part of verse 7, the brothers say, could we possibly have known he would say, bring your brother down? Verse 8, then Judah said to Israel, his father, remember that Jacob is also called Israel, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. This is a matter of life and death. Starvation is in the land. If they get the grain, they live. If they don't, they die. Grain is life. Verse 9, I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. Notice here that Judah is willing to accept the blame if things go wrong, but he doesn't really foresee that there are any circumstances where he will have to accept any of the actual consequences of what might happen. So as we go on, Jacob finally gives in, and he says, okay, gather up some things for a present for this man. Be sure that you take the money that he sent back last time and take more money with you to pay for the grain this time. Joseph is determined to pay for the grain with the fruits of his own labor. And finally he says, take your brother Benjamin with you. He concedes that God is really in control here. He says, take your brother also, arise and go back to the man. Verse 14, and may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So Jacob has finally turned it over to God. So the brothers go back to Egypt. They meet Joseph again. Joseph instructs his steward to take them to his house and prepare a meal, and he will join them at noon. The brothers are nervous about this. In verse 18, we see, now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, it is because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys. Can you see the pressure building here? Can you see how nervous they are? They're beginning to realize that the mess they're in is because of the mess they've made of their life and because of the sins and the lies that they have told. So on the way to the house, they try and explain it to the steward, to tell him all what happened, and that they don't understand why the money was back in their sack. But look what the steward says in verse 23. But he said, peace be with you, and do not be afraid. Your God and your God of your father has given you the treasure in your sacks. I had your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. Now this seems kind of confusing, doesn't it? But what he's telling them is that he had the money all along for the grain. And he is saying that God is the one that got the money back in your sack. Well, how could that be? We know that Joseph was the one who instructed the steward to put the money back in his sack, but the steward sees the character of God in his Lord and Master, Joseph. And he's telling the brothers, don't worry, the grain was paid for. It had to be paid for, didn't it? Although Pharaoh gave Joseph authority over the distribution of the grain, it's the Pharaoh's grain. So how did it get paid for? Well, the only way it could have been is if Joseph paid for the grain himself. So they went into the dining room and they prepared the meal. Let's pick it up at verse 26. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hands into the house and bowed down before him to the earth. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" And they answered, "Your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. Then he, this is Joseph, lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now his heart yearned for his brother, so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber, and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself. And he said, "Serve the bread." Now let me just describe the scene here. The brothers have been brought into the dining room of the second most powerful man in Egypt. Egypt is the most advanced civilization the world has ever known to this point. Joseph is there in all his splendor with his fine linen clothing, with his gold rings and gold around his neck. There are other Egyptian guests there as well, dressed equally well. And then you have the brothers of Joseph sitting by themselves, a bunch of goat herds from Canaan, their long beards, their woolen clothing. Joseph is sitting by himself. His brothers are by themselves. The Egyptians are by themselves because they can't imagine having anything to do with people who are as lowly as a bunch of nomads from Canaan. The tension in the room is high. There's a lot of pressure here. But Joseph goes ahead and serves the food. And in verse 34, it says, "Then he took servings to them from before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him." Chapter 44 opens up with Joseph again giving instructions to his steward. First of all, he says, fill their sacks full of grain. Put their money back in the sacks. Joseph intends the grain to be a free gift. And then he says, put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack of the youngest, in Benjamin's sack. This is a special cup. Not just that it's silver, but this is a cup that was used in the Egyptian pagan religion to attempt to divine the future. What they would do is put some liquid in there and then a little bit of oil. And then they would observe the pattern of the oil on top and attempt to figure out what the future would hold. We'll talk more about that cup in here in just a minute. So the next morning, Joseph's brothers are sent out. And shortly after they leave, Joseph instructs his steward, you go after them and accuse them of stealing the silver cup. He does this, and we see the response to this accusation in verse 7. And they said to him, this is the brothers, why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servants should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. They're determined to pay for the grain. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. And he said, this is the steward speaking now, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. This is kind of confusing here, isn't it? It sounds like he's contradicting himself.
But when he says, now let it be according to your words, he's referring to what the brothers said up in verse 8. When they said, how could we then steal silver and gold from my Lord's house? He's being polite. He's saying, I hope it's not so. I hope I don't find the silver cup. But of course, he knows he's going to find the silver cup. And he has instructions from Joseph, so he's got to change the punishment for whoever the cup is found with. And so he says, whoever it's found will be a slave, and the rest will be blameless. So he searches the sacks, and of course he finds the cup. The men tear their clothes in anguish, pack up their donkeys, and back they go to Joseph's house. Verse 14, so Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there. And they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I could certainly practice divination? I don't think Joseph actually practices divination here. It's something that's prohibited throughout the Old Testament. God made this very clear. But I think there's two reasons that he's allowing them to think that. For one, it makes the silver cup much more valuable. It's not just a silver cup. It's a silver cup that the Egyptians imagine has some magical powers. The other reason is that, what was the other reason? The silver cup. It has magical powers. He's going to allow them to think. It is also going to allow him to keep his cover. You notice Joseph is one step ahead of them all the time. He always seems to know what's going on. But they don't recognize him yet. So he's going to allow them to believe that the reason he knows what's going on is because he can tell, because he has the silver cup from which he can do divination. Then verse 16. Then Judah said, what shall we say, my Lord? What shall we speak, or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants, and here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and also with whom the cup was found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so, for the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. So the brothers now realize that their sin has finally caught up with them. And they're not just thinking about the silver cup. They're thinking all the way back about how they had had their other brother enslaved. So Judah steps up again here, and he reviews the whole story. He goes through the whole thing again. Talks about how they didn't know how the money got back in there, and they brought it back because they're going to pay for the grain. They particularly say that if they lose Benjamin, Benjamin is the only remaining son of their father's beloved wife Rachel. And their father Jacob has told them that if Benjamin doesn't come back, I'm going to die from sorrow. Verse 30, now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant, he's talking about himself, became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as the slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. What happens next? Well, we'll have to wait till next year. Greg's going to preach on chapter 45. Our task today is to figure out what Joseph is up to in chapters 43 and 44. To do that, I think we should ask ourselves three questions. First question, is this some elaborate scheme on Joseph's part to retaliate against his brothers? Well, I don't think that's the case. He could have done that earlier. He could have, when they first came back in chapter 42, enslaved them, imprisoned them, had them killed. That's not what he's after. If he's not trying to exact retribution, he must be trying to put the family back together. So if he's trying to do that, why didn't he just reveal himself when they first showed up? Hey, I'm Joseph, your brother. Tell everybody to come to Egypt. It'll be great. There's plenty of food. But remember, the last time Joseph had seen his brothers, they were selling him into slavery. If he just reunites the family right then, he has no idea whether these feelings of envy and hatred will continue in the family. And he knows that's no way to restore a family. In fact, Joseph knows that God made a covenant with his great-grandfather Abraham. And that covenant was reaffirmed to his grandfather Isaac, to his father Jacob. And in that covenant, there were 3 promises. God promised that the descendants of Abraham would live forever in the land of Canaan. He promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation, and that nation would be, third, a blessing to all the nations of the world. So as Joseph looks at the situation, he knows that he has to reunite his family in a way that will make it possible for them to be a part of the fulfillment of these promises. God is working with him all along. God is in this throughout everything Joseph is doing. These 12 brothers are the 12 brothers who will be the 12 tribes of Israel. So, if that's what Joseph is trying to do, how is he going to accomplish it? If we were in this same situation today, we could go to Matthew 18, where Jesus gave a procedure, a process for us to repair relationships damaged by sin. But Jesus won't be born for 1900 more years or so. They don't even have the law of Moses yet. That's 400 years in the future. So how does Joseph know what to do? Well, he knows what to do because he knows the character of God. His steward has even recognized that in him. When his steward said, the reason you got the reason you got your money back is because God's in this. Think about this. Joseph's grandfather Isaac was still alive when Joseph was sold into slavery. Joseph had the opportunity to talk to his grandfather Isaac. Isaac actually spoke to God on a regular basis. His father Jacob spoke to God and even wrestled with God. So Joseph knows the character of God, and that's what will guide him. So we read through the text. So now let's look back and look at the things that he did and see how they fit into this process as he tries to restore his family. To help you with that, on the back of your bulletin, there's an outline there, and we'll use that as we do it. So first, there are 5 points. Actually, there are 6. There are 5 listed in your bulletin. 1 I didn't figure out until yesterday, so there'll be an extra one. But for the first 2, let's go back to chapter 42 that Greg preached on last week. When we go back to chapter 42, after Joseph accuses them of being spies in verse 9, they make their defense in verse 13. And then the brothers are figuring out that they're in a bit of a mess here. In verse 21, they say, then they said to one another, the brothers, we are truly guilty concerning our brother. They're talking about Joseph there. For we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore his distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. You see here, Joseph knew what was going on. He understood what they were saying to each other, and he knew that their consciences were bothering them. And because he knew their consciences were bothering him, he knew that there was a possibility for restoration. And that's our first point, if you look at your outline. We learn from the life of Joseph so we can restore a relationship by recognizing when restoration is possible. The second point is also in chapter 42 there. You notice that he kept Simeon as a hostage, and he also only gave them 1 year's worth of grain. Joseph knows this is going to be a 7-year famine. What is he doing here? He's making sure that his brothers are going to come back. He knows they have to come back. They have to come back because this process of restoration can't happen if there's no contact. So he's maintaining contact. So we learn from the life of Joseph how we can restore a relationship by maintaining contact, even when it's difficult. For our third point, we can go back to chapter 43. You remember when that they're in the dining room and they're getting ready for the meal. And when Joseph came in and he saw his younger brother Benjamin, he was almost overcome with emotion. He had to take himself out of the room to regain his composure. And when he came back in, it said that he had to restrain himself. That's because he recognized that in situations like this, where there's so much pressure between two parties trying to repair a relationship, that emotion, excessive emotion, will only make things worse. You have to keep his mind together, keep his head straight. He's trying to orchestrate this whole procedure with the help of God to bring his family back together. So we also learn from the life of Joseph that when we're restoring a relationship, we have to exercise self-control. We learn by exercising self-control. Here's the one I just figured out yesterday. I was trying to figure out what to do with verse 34. Remember when Joseph served the meal and he gave his brother Benjamin 5 times as much as he gave everybody else? Why was he doing that? Well, he was checking them. He was checking to see if they would be jealous when he gave exceptional favor to his younger brother Benjamin. Benjamin, the other son of Jacob's wife, Rachel. He's looking to see how they react. He's doing that because although he's seen that their conscience has been bothering them, he doesn't know if there's really been any change in their heart. And that's what he's looking for, because that's what matters. That's what will make it possible for something to be different. And they passed the test. The last part of that says, so they drank and were merry with him. Now the silver cup. Why did Joseph put the silver cup in Benjamin's sack? Well, he did that to put Benjamin in danger. So his brothers would realize that they were about to lose another one of their father's sons. He did that to put them in a box. And Judah, of course, is representing his brothers. So Judah has a choice to make here. Because if they lose Benjamin, they know that their father will die from the sorrow of that. But on the other hand, they still need the grain, don't they? The grain is life. So he's on the spot. He's in a box. He can either continue what he's been doing for years, which is continue the lies and the deception, say whatever it takes to get me out of the trouble I'm in right now, or he can turn and for the first time do what is actually best for his family. What Joseph has done here is he's giving his brothers an opportunity to repent. He's put them in a position where they're faced with that decision. So we learn from the life of Joseph how we can restore a relationship by facilitating repentance. That's what Joseph is doing here. And then finally, Judah does his part. In verse 33, when he offers to take the place of his brother Benjamin. He's made the decision that he's going to come clean. And he's not only going to say, you can blame me if you want, but he's going to say, I will accept
I will actually accept what's going to happen here. I'll take my brother's place. So what he did is he actually took the crucial step of initiating reconciliation, and that's what we learned in that last point from the life of Joseph, that eventually somebody has to make that critical step that makes everything else possible. And that's what Judah has done here. So all the pieces are in place, and we're ready for next week to find out what happens. But before we do that, I'd have you just consider one other thing. The title of this message is Grace Under Pressure. And I've certainly pointed out some places where there's tremendous pressure. The brothers are under tremendous pressure because they're caught in a web of lies. They have a difficult decision to make. They don't want to lose another brother, but they have to have the grain. What shall they do? Tremendous pressure. Joseph is under tremendous pressure. He desperately wants to get his family restored so that his family would be ready to do what God would have them do as a family, to be God's chosen people eventually. So we easily see where the pressure is. There's lots of pressure. What about the grace? Well, grace is unmerited favor. What do the brothers deserve here? They deserve nothing. And what did they get? They got grain. They got life. That's grace under pressure. Would you pray with me?